welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Douville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who, following Rule 39, never says no to Bacta.
Tim Longo. I got that line as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I got that one quite a few times, actually, because I was sending a lot of troopers for Bacta, so that happened frequently. That's one of the few that repeats. It's enough that it stood out.
Yeah, I only got it once somehow, I think, but yeah.
So you probably played better than I did.
No,
probably played on easy.
No, that didn't. No, okay. Neither of those I think are true, but yeah.
We are, of course, talking about, for a first for us on the podcast, we're going back to a game that we were involved in. We've talked about game series that we were involved in. Actually, mostly you were involved in, I suppose. I don't think we've talked about anything I've been involved with. Other than sort of as an aside.
Morrowind yet, so.
And I wasn't involved with that one, so.
No, but I came
to that a lot. I guess technically I was involved in the politics. Anyway, we are talking about Republic Commando, which is the third and final game that we worked on together in our time at LucasArts. And it actually was pretty fun for me to go back to this one. We'll talk about 2005. And you had texted and you pretty much had the same response. So, I mean, is that accurate?
Yeah. I couldn't exactly tell you when the last time was that I played the game all the way through for sure, but it's got to be because what we talked about last episode, 15 year anniversary.
Yep.
It came in February. And so, kind of, there was a mini spike for some tweets toward me and probably you at that time. So it kind of refreshed my memory. So at least more than 10 years ago. So yeah, and as is well documented, my memory is terrible anyway. So
right.
There's times when I'm like,
it's a brand new game.
Yeah. So it's definitely been fun to go back to it for various reasons, just for nostalgia, but also just for me, just for, speaking for myself, to kind of assess a little bit of my career and sort of like, what it was like then and where I am today and, lessons learned and lessons apparently not learned. Because there are some things that I could have learned from myself.
You're still leaving characters out to hang to never learn their fate. Is that what's still going on?
Yeah.
This is the second game that you did that in.
Yeah. I can't say. I
assume Reddy and Sev are off hanging in a bar somewhere at the end of the galaxy.
Well, let's just say that there could be some future things where that happens again. So. That I can't talk about, but So
is this about the hiking game?
Yeah, the hiking. Right, I have a whole cliffhanger planned.
Zing!
Oh, nice. Didn't even plan that one, as I never do. Yeah, so it's been fun to go back to it, and as we talk about on the podcast, it's always interesting to play games for podcasts because for better or for worse, I put on a different filter, I start thinking differently about things because for the podcast. So that's been also interesting because if I had gone back and played it just for fun without the podcast, I definitely wouldn't be taking the notes I'm taking, kind of thing. So it's going to be weird because I have to kind of step outside myself for sure, to some degree. So yeah, it's been good.
Yeah, I also have to step outside of you, so that's good. But for me it was also, I've played it more recently than that. I streamed it. I streamed about half of it in 2015, I think. And some of those videos are still on YouTube. We discussed that last time, my ongoing hatred of that platform as a result. But yeah, it was fun to go back to it. I saw a few issues as I was playing that I would classify as bugs, but I think they're all content bugs and not programming bugs, so it was fine. It didn't bother me. Yeah, no, it was a good time to revisit it. It was fun. I look forward to playing the rest of it. The same pain points exist on this playthrough as have existed on prior playthroughs, so I will bring those up. But yeah, let's set the table a little bit with 2005 in games. It's kind of a weird title for us because we both ended our time at LucasArts at the end of 2004. You left, I believe, middle of December, maybe end of November, middle of December, I think.
I think so. Yeah, I think it was somewhere early December, maybe somewhere around there.
Somewhere around there, and I left. For me, it would have been very late in the month, December, like 21st or something like that, 22nd, just as I was about to pack up the stuff and leave California altogether and come to Maryland, where I've lived for the past 15 years. So yeah, it's a little weird to think this is a 2005 game, but it didn't come out, in fact, until February. It's a year that we've revisited before with God of War and Shadow of the Colossus in our Eco Shadow of the Colossus series. It also was. I mean, this was a very interesting year. It's the year of a new console, start of a new cycle of consoles. It's had a lot of good games in it. It was in sort of the last gasp of tons of Star Wars games, which we'll get to in a moment. But I marked down a number of titles from this year in addition that are of interest, some of which I think probably bear revisiting as well. Resident Evil 4, Psychonauts, Guild Wars, Civ 4, Fear, Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, which is the third in that series, and some say the best, Animal Crossing Wild World, which is to tie back to our prior discussion, Guitar Hero, and Mercenaries. And then I have in addition to this game, 4 other Star Wars titles, although one of them is just the Windows release. That's KOTOR 2. It had come out in December, I believe, on the original Xbox, and then the Windows version came out in February at the beginning of the month, as well as Star Wars Battlefront 2, which I think maybe April, Lego Star Wars, and the Episode 3 tie-in game, Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. So big year. You had a couple others I think you had mentioned.
I think we added them. The only one, Gran Turismo, or not Gran Turismo, but
Forza.
Forza was one.
Mercenaries? Did I say Mercenaries?
You said Mercenaries, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And
right, so I didn't jot down Forza, so that's the one I missed.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned Chaos Theory, Doom 3. I don't remember if you mentioned that, but yeah.
Doom 3 would have been a console release, I think, because Doom 3 was a game.
Oh, yes, it was Xbox. You're right. It was Xbox. Yep. But anyway, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep, big year.
And the console release, there might actually, I should have looked this up. I think the DS also came out in this year, but the console release I was speaking about was Xbox 360. Microsoft getting a jump on the next generation, coming out almost a full year before the PS3. PlayStation kind of trying to sit pretty with the PS2 and ride that out a little bit. That actually turned out not to be a winning strategy for them. This worked out. Coming out first worked this generation, I guess, because it wasn't as crowded as the one prior, when the Dreamcast had come out first and been a pretty good console, but got just did not make it as a result, and that was not the fate of the 360. So yeah, it's and you know, with all that ushered in particular HD gaming, I think would probably be the big change for the 360.
Yeah, I think HD gaming, and I think a fully embracing online play. Like it was introduced with the original Xbox, and Halo 2 most notably, really pushed it. Xbox Live essentially, but I think that 360 was when really Live became. I think that was the key feature for that for that. That's what gave them that's the thing that Dreamcast didn't have. Dreamcast came out first, but didn't have that one feature.
Didn't have something, right? Yeah,
didn't have that hook in HD as well, for sure. But
or at least the hooks that they tried just didn't land.
Fair enough.
Because they did have that weird little separate MU thing, and right. I mean, they tried things, but they didn't fully nail it, or at least they didn't resonate with people. I agreed. Yes, because Xbox Live Arcade would come, I think, maybe even the next year, and that was a huge deal. Now that was the beginning of downloadable titles on consoles, and so it really is a touchstone console for a lot of reasons. For the Republic Commando, it had an impact because it was coming out, and that meant original Xbox titles were sort of persona non grata in the market, unless they had Xbox Live on the box, which meant they had to have an online component, which is something we can talk about. We probably won't get to this time, but I just wanted to note that sort of market pressure was there. Even when we were finishing this game, so a good year and a half before the 360 would have come out, this was a known problem. So it impacted development throughout the time that I was on the title. I came on fairly late. I was in on the early discussions on the title. Then I was exiled to the wilderness of a game that never shipped, and returned to lead the engineering team to its successful conclusion rather of the project.
I thought you said collusion.
I say, and that successful collusion on the project. There's a lot of colluding going on between engineers and designers, not always successfully. Anyway, let's dive into the game. Unless there's more you want to talk about with 2005 or anything you want to highlight about that year.
No, I mean, we can pepper in some of the team stories as we go, maybe, especially, I can only assume we haven't discussed it much, but I can only assume we'll have some guests on. I think we'll have good people to pick from. So we can talk about some of that, but the team state and the company state was very weird, for this game, outside of our control. So we don't have to dwell on that, but nothing more to say about 2005 really.
It certainly was. While I was off in the wilderness, and another title after this game shipped, you went into the wilderness, quite literally. I did.
I was in a completely different mental state. Yeah. And I didn't until you kind of brought the list up, it didn't kind of dawn on me some of the sort of similarities with the launch of God of War, because when we talked about that game, we also talked about how late that game came out in the PS2's. That was kind of one of the last big PS2 games that still did really well, but they were also moving off of the PS2, and so it didn't dawn on me that we weren't first party, of course, but we were in that last wave of Xbox original games, and it was kind of a weird place to be. We had the PC version, so we weren't exclusively that, of course, but it was the timing, and am I remembering that? Well, obviously we finished when we said, and it's not too common to hold a game for that long. But there was, I feel like I remember Chris Williams saying that there was some strategic, they were intentionally.
Right. They were intentionally
distancing from us from a timing perspective.
Right. They wanted to distance us so it was a needle they wanted to thread basically between KOTOR 2 coming out at the end of the year and Battlefront 2, which I think came out in April. I didn't look up that date, but that's my recollection.
Oh, man, it's so many Star Wars games.
I know it's a lot in a pretty short window. And the other thing is that Lego Star Wars, I mean, that in and of itself was a weird thing, because that deal was done by licensing, not talking to LucasArts, which was not supposed to be a thing. With Traveler's Tales over in I think the UK, right? And so when LucasArts got wind of it, it was a surprise, and it became a whole thing. And it also made it. I mean, that's part of why there's so many Star Wars games, is like, and you did some stuff that we didn't know about. So weren't part of the planning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so LucasArts' schedule was impacted by a deal that the ranch had done. I mean, yeah, don't get me wrong, great deal to do, great game, a lot of fun to play, but and the first of a very long running series at this point might itself be worth looking at some point.
Yeah, fair enough. Yep, definitely it's almost a subgenre of its own at this point, and
and there have been a lot of them, a lot of those Legos games, covering some of your favorites, including Batman and Star Wars. So there you have it.
Arguably spawning even movie franchises, right? At this point,
yeah,
so,
absolutely.
But super weird time. With Star Wars games, and then also, which we won't get too much in. The company was going through a big change as well, LucasArts specifically. So,
and part of that change was to do fewer Star Wars titles.
Yeah,
fewer but bigger. I think was the sort of changing strategy. Whereas in the era that I was there, that we were there, it was more, in part at the direction of Lucasfilm, to maximize the tie-ins with the movies. So the new trilogy, I should say, so that there were a number of games you can remember in the Starfighter era. There was Racer, and then there was a Racer sequel. There was the 2 Starfighter games. There were other games that were coming out, some that tied into the original, I should say, trilogy. But also a play the movie game, and et cetera. So there was just a lot of finding ways to tie into the franchise. So it was a whole
crowded
thing.
Fast. Yep.
Yeah, and that was part of how licensing worked in the industry at the time. Was licenses were big bread and butter for big publishers. In particular, EA, I think, was really best known as being sort of the leader, let's say, in licensing titles and leveraging licenses for marketing and returns. So, definitely part of the strategy. And then that was shifting, at least going forward at LucasArts in theory.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well let's move on to the game then, and put a pin in that. It was. It's quite something to put this on again. I love the intro. I still like the intro to this game, the unskippable intro. But maybe you should set up the game a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's various places to go, and I don't know if there's what the right order to go in really would be, but I guess I can at least. We can bounce back and forth on sort of the genesis of the idea and the game specifically, like why we wanted to make it, and where the inspirations were coming from and the influences specifically, and then that will lead a little bit into the intro, and into various other aspects. But Brett included, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast in the past for, I don't even know what reason I had mentioned it, but I feel like I have a vague memory of that. But I was always a huge Rainbow Six fan, and a lot of us were, and both Rainbow Six and Rogue Spear, its sequel, we did a lot of playing of that, and especially co-op. After we finished Jedi Starfighter, I think a lot of us wanted to move to a different genre. And I think there are also maybe some strategic reasons too, because I think flight action games were either being focused like at Factor 5 or were there just too many of them or something. I don't remember that. I have a vague memory of that too, but I remember.
I don't think that they were selling as well or projected to sell as well either.
Right.
And for the investment, and I think that this was a time in which teams were growing. Right. I mean, we were 30-ish on. Maybe under 30 for Starfighter and Jedi Starfighter, and around 40 to 50, I guess, for this game.
Yeah,
I want to say. So
I think it peaked about 50.
Yeah, and so you're looking at just budgets growing and needing to have that return on investment. And so I think that was part of the strategic thing as well. And Daron, of course, wanted to be he's a first person shooter guy, right? I mean, we've had him on the cast to talk about Dark Forces, but he had also done Outlaws, and it was something that was close to his heart and something he'd like to return to as well. So that might also have been an impetus at the time.
Yeah, and I think shooters were still maintaining a pretty dominant place as well. I think and we were all fans, and you have a great legacy with Dark Forces and the Jedi Knight games, but I think there was sort of the personal influences of the Rainbow Sixes, which is, at the time I would still even call niche. And other than Siege today, there's still squad-based games, of a highly tactical nature, that are very, very complicated, not very complicated, but pretty dense to get into, right? And usually fairly lethal, highly lethal, and very militaristic, And so, that wouldn't necessarily work as well for a Star Wars game, because that just, is sort of a little bit oil and water when it comes to the Star Wars audience, right? You don't want to make a literal clone of a Rainbow Six game because it's just too hardcore. But some other shooters started to surface, and some big events happened around this time. I don't remember. I'll have the orders and the dates probably wrong exactly, but as an example, you have Half-Life 2 that came out, which we talked about and played Half-Life 1, and we did a bonus episode for Half-Life 2. Obviously, huge, enormous influence when it comes to presentation and depth. And if you want to listen to more of that, you can go back and listen to our Half-Life series, where we probably talk ad nauseum about that stuff. But the other one that I want to mention is actually Medal of Honor Allied Assault specifically. And the reason is because that was obviously heavily influenced by Saving Private Ryan, etc. But that was EA's sort of, and really the I think they were called 2015 before they left EA, and
right.
this I'm talking about Jason West and blanking on his name. He's running Respawn right now.
I'd help you if I could remember his name, but I can't.
Oh, so embarrassed. People are yelling at their podcast listeners. Anyway, Vince, right? Vince Zampella. Yep. The funny thing is, I forgot his name, and Jason isn't even in the industry anymore.
He's retired from the industry, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, the two of them, they eventually, obviously, famously started Infinity Ward when they left EA. But while they were working with EA, they made Allied Assault. And the reason I bring that game up is because of its military tone and sort of showing that soldier's eye view of conflict in a game form. Obviously, famously, the D-Day experience being the main one. But, when you see, if you can kind of take those two games at first, and if you've played them, great. If you haven't, maybe watch some videos or something. But I think a lot of, at least for my influences, and I think a lot of our influences when we were playing those games, if you blend Rainbow Six and Allied Assault together in some ways, there's a lot. I think you can see a lot of some of the formula that we were pulling from. Now, there's definitely other influences. Halo was a huge influence that came out during the production or the development of this game, and arguably, once you see the final product of RC, as we'll talk about as we go through this series, you can if you play the game, you can very clearly see Halo's influences, I think.
You can feel it.
Yeah, you can feel it. I think it comes down to everything, especially because
someday we'll have to argue about the jump button too.
Yeah,
or at least talk about how that was an argument.
Yes, yeah, no,
agreed. I don't disagree with the choice we made, but I do remember that being a question.
Yeah, I agree, and I think a very appropriate debate for sure. But I think, as we go through, I think Halo will come up multiple times. And so that's why I'm putting that one aside for a second, because I think Rainbow Six and Allied Assault probably won't come up very much other than what I'm mentioning here. Half-Life will keep coming up, I'm sure, as well. but there was a sweet spot in the Venn diagram for me of having some of the spirit of that squad feel that you get when you play. Specifically, it was sort of like, I don't remember if we used this phrase at all, but you have to remind me. But I feel like we would say things like, we want the feel of playing co-op Rainbow Six, but
we absolutely would, but say
not co-op. You know, so that was a lot of the inspiration,
and not with the lethality.
Well, yeah, not with the lethality. Definitely not with the sort of tactical,
right?
if you know what I mean. Yeah. You know, because especially Rainbow Six and Rogue Spear in those days, very technical games for a shooter, and that was part of their popularity. I mean, they were near sim like, right? You're talking like ARMA kind of, you know, early ARMA kind of feel to some of the tactical map stuff you could do, which they eventually went away from, of course. So we weren't talking about that. We were more of just talking about like going on a terrorist hunt, you know, in those games, and which was a mode, by the way, not a great name, but you know, that feel of coordination, right, that we had when you're playing and talking on mic, and we're playing obviously on a LAN at work, so it's a highly specific situation,
right? All within earshot of
all within earshot. Yeah, so super fun, but very specific. But you know, the whole conceit for Republic Commando was, how do we bring that experience to a more mass audience? And of course, at the time, you couldn't get much more mass audience than the Star Wars base, for gamers at least. And then, like I said, with Allied Assault, there's one specific mechanical influence that for me that I'll mention, but mainly is sort of the tonal influence of like something we didn't really see a lot of with Star Wars, especially with a lot of the games that you mentioned, and I'll get to Battlefront in a second. You didn't really see that, you know, that soldier's eye view of things very often, especially in the films, especially in the prequels, but also, you know, just in the games. And Battlefront was definitely sort of this weird internal competitor for us. And as people know, not even developed internally. It was a pandemic game, but they were their goal was much more play the movie in a way, when it comes to like being able, you're still a soldier in many cases, but you still have Jedi, you still have these huge battles where, you know, you can fly and do everything. And they were great games for that purpose. But we were trying to look at sort of a smaller slice, and in fact, the game started out as
a much smaller slice originally.
Yeah. Not only was it, you should, why don't you talk about that?
I mean, I think you're probably better suited to talking about this, but the original pitch for the game was to be literally a single day in the life of these commandos. The day of the Battle of Geonosis, the whole campaign was meant to take place. The whole game was meant to take place on Geonosis. It wouldn't have just been the section that shipped with the game. It would have been longer than that, but it would have been essentially one whole day in their life. So it was also sort of a weird high concept in that sense. Mm-hmm. I think it's good that marketing talked us out of that, to be honest, because while I think that is an interesting high concept idea, I don't think that would have flown at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it was meant to be kind of the longest, you know, the movie The Longest Day kind of feel, based on what battle is that based on? Shoot, is that the Bulge? I forget.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't remember. But anyway, yeah. And I remember even Chris and Greg, Chris Williams and Greg Knight. Chris, by the way, he started out as the art director.
That's Normandy.
Is it Normandy? Oh, okay. Yep. Shoot. Okay. I didn't think that, but that makes sense. Anyway, Chris Williams started out as the art director, and then also moved into sort of project lead or EP or what have you, or not EP, but I don't remember what his
project leader. Yeah. I don't know if they were still calling him that at the time. No,
because essentially like the lead producer kind of person of the.
He started as the lead artist and moved to that. Yeah.
But Greg Knight was the lead concept artist and worked. So the two of them I remember sort of those early concepts that they were doing for how to prove to people that it was possible to have a good sense of variety and still take place only on one planet, which was again another sort of bucking the trend of Star Wars, because obviously Star Wars is a planet hopping kind of franchise, right? So you intentionally want to move from location to location, and so it was risky to, yeah. And I still like the concept, but of course I'm biased. But
no, I mean, like I said, it's totally a game that I think is interesting from that standpoint, but it's also
super risky, and yeah,
it adds risk. you know,
for sure. And I'm happy that we left Geonosis for sure, and we'll talk about that as we go. Yeah, the other side of it, though, that you may not remember with the original concept is that it wasn't about commandos at the time. In fact, Kevin Schmitt, who...
No, I remember that now.
Oh, okay,
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Kevin Schmitt, I just remember it being a squad of soldiers, not specifically.
Right, it was just going to be clone troopers. Right. Your sort of base, and that I'm bringing that up because it goes back to the Allied assault. You're just another cog in the machine kind of thing. And then as a clone, in my mind, it was even more sort of effective of a theme because clones are extremely dependable or disposable. So
right.
So you have a clone, you have not only a soldier, but you have a trooper that is a clone who isn't expected to survive, So I thought that was even more interesting. But ultimately, we did go with a sort of more elite squad sort of flavor because we wanted that tone, and we wanted to kind of commit to these characters rather than make them so disposable. So yeah, so I mean, that's just sort of a little bit of some of the early concept phase sort of murmurs of sort of like how we were thinking things through. But specifically to bring up the Allied assault mechanical influence. Yeah, so you have Rainbow Six, where we wanted to sort of simulate for single players a co-op experience, and that was hard enough to do, as Brett will talk about over time. Anyway, without all of the sort of highly technical aspects that Rainbow Six brought in, and without the lethality and difficulty. But then in Allied Assault, there was a sort of quote unquote presentation, and we had a new sort of development director come into the studio, Peter Hirschmann, who worked at EA with 2015 on the Medal of Honor series. So he had some good feedback there. But the one frustration that I always had personally with Allied Assault, because I was such a big squad-based shooter fan, was because they did a great job of the presentation, and you always had sort of friendly companions around with you in those battles. They were running up the beach with you, or they're going through trenches with you, or what have you, and generally fairly scripted, or in an AI mode where you didn't really have obviously any control over them. And I always wanted to just point at a window while I was playing Allied Assault and tell a guy to go snipe from that window for me. You know what I mean? It was just like a simple, like, can you just go do a thing? Because you're just running around. You're either scripted or you're running around like an AI would run around. And, it just kind of breaks it, some for me. And you're supposed to be I don't remember exactly, but I think you were supposed to be like the squad leader or something. And so that was sort of like the genesis of and I think that's even how I might have pitched the maneuver system, is that, this is just a point and click, tell a person to go do a thing, it's just real simple. Because then in my mind, at least, I think the idea was you get a little bit of that Rainbow Six tactical, but it's hopefully easier to do, in an Allied Assault kind of way.
Right. Yeah, absolutely meant to be easier to do. And to some degree, I think that was one of the critical complaints, which is kind of, I actually looked back and read a couple of reviews, and it was like, yeah, but you can't just put them anywhere or whatever. And I was like, are you kidding me? Nobody was really doing a lot of that at the time, to have that kind of flexibility and, or to be able to have the feeling of being able to be in charge, right? To be able to do that. So it was a wish fulfillment to give you, and maybe a step in the direction of something else. I don't know, but I definitely felt like, I mean, this thing does a lot. It's funny. It's always funny to look at reviews and be like, yeah, but we tried these other things and they worked worse. For example, it's and one of the things that I love that you always said, especially I remember on this project, is that the consumer only sees what's in the box. They don't see how you got to what's in the box. But as a developer, whenever I'm reading these reviews, I'm always thinking, yeah, but there's this was the best thing we found, in the time that we had to work on a thing. We tried some other thing, right? And it wasn't as fun, or we didn't think it was as fun, or we thought it would take too much to bring it to the finish line or whatever.
And there's there are lots of squad-based shooters out there, right? And they all did different things. Rainbow Six continued to, in fact, Rainbow Six Vegas, I think, is maybe the pinnacle of at least their campaign content that they've done. And they didn't use a maneuver system or anything. They had some pretty good flexibility, but it comes at a cost too, right? Because you can't. Yeah. It's the usual compromise of design. You have to pick your direction and go for it, and it's going to inherently leave other directions behind. And so,
right. And this is a shooter for a Star Wars audience, not a Star Wars game for a shooter audience.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a big part of that, is what are you foregrounding there? Trying to get to to Star Wars players who might not have played a tactical shooter like a Rainbow Six or something like that.
Most of them haven't. Yeah, most of them.
Right.
Yeah.
And so trying to make that more accessible meant those sorts of limitations or choices. I shouldn't even call them limitations, but just sort of streamlining a lot of that and making you feel like, yeah, that's a good place to put it, dude. As you play.
Well, and to add in another example that ends up being little did we know at the time, because they had shipped while we had already started. But Halo is another example where sort of a little bit of a weird example when it comes to the squad conversation, because there's the level design in Halo is such that, especially in the first one, where there are pretty big open sections of levels. It's not necessarily, there are corridor sections in that game, but they're definitely huge, obviously because of vehicles and etc. But the battles at the time were quite big and very impressive. And then they would often have Marines running around with you, who were sort of like acting squad-ish, right? But you didn't have commands for them. But you would protect them, and they would help you, and you'd give them weapons. You could take their weapons, So there was some interactivity there that was pretty cool. They would get into vehicles with you, so there was that camaraderie was there, but you didn't have commands, So I still felt like Halo is an amazing game and it brought a lot to the table. But I definitely am biased, but I appreciated having at least a little bit of control over your team because of the stuff that we had. And I'm completely biased for sure, but the other aspect that we'll get into over the course of the series, I'm sure that I really still appreciate from playing this last session, is that when you do have tools like the maneuvers in there, it allows the level designers to really, yes, you can't put them anywhere, but I think by making decisions about where to put them, it causes the level design to really embrace them better. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And so I really, and I think in some of the early levels in Geonosis that we played, I think you can see the level designers starting to really kind of figure that stuff out, depending on the level. So it's really interesting. And I think it even gets better as we play. I'm excited, in my vague memory, to get certain rooms that are coming up for us, because I really remember them being interesting. So,
yeah. The other influence I can think of as far as the squad stuff goes, another game that came out while we were building this was Freedom Fighters.
Yeah.
Which had the rather than having sort of direct control, go do this, it was more of a it's more like the stance controls in Republic Commando, where it's sort of be aggressive, pull back, I can't remember the specifics, but it was more like on that kind of a grander, like this should be our kind of attitude approach. Right. So a sort of similar sort of feel to some degree, but without the sort of direct control. And of course, we tried to do both in this. So
right. Yeah, and I don't know if you remember, but I don't remember those conversations as much. I think that sort of ended up being a bit necessary because the maneuver system, though I'm a biased fan of it, it wasn't ever intended to be the end all be all of squad stuff, so there's still, right. I think there's still going to be, especially if you play on hard, I think there's still times when you really kind of need to micromanage the stances to really leverage things, as I recall, because because yes, the maneuvers are not everywhere. So you kind of in between those moments where the level designer didn't explicitly set them up, that you need to really leverage the stances. The other, so sorry, that was a bit of a roundabout way to get to the intro, but the intro, obviously, which is hopefully obvious, Half-Life for me, I can speak for myself. I'm sure for the animators and artists and stuff, it was different influences, but we had a mantra / goal of, it's not a game based on Jedi. There's no Jedi in the game. In fact, I think we even have some voice lines talking about that from time to time. And, it's the soldier's eye view, and kind of we're off the beaten path. The squad, we very explicitly in the Geonosis section talk about how, we're below kind of the conflict and doing a covert ops, cool, spec ops kind of thing. And then, with the intro, it was very much about showing, quite literally, we had this opportunity to show the life of a clone. And so, we thought, let's start at the beginning, and have that very Half-Life-y kind of feel to it. We definitely just chose to pack a lot into that intro versus, say, the Half-Life tram ride or something where you're kind of being, more Disneyland Park kind of led through it. But
well, we also had to do it for technical reasons. So
do tell.
Do you not recall? Maybe you don't remember.
I don't remember the intro at all. You mean having an intro?
The intro at all came from a technical requirement.
This is vaguely familiar, but you need to talk.
Yeah, no, I'll explain. So it takes a little bit of setting up to understand it, but the original Xbox was manufactured from off-the-shelf parts, and because they wanted to get it out quickly, they didn't have any way to build something entirely new. That was something that was going to come for the Xbox hardware. So they used off-the-shelf components for most of what was in the box, including especially the hard drives. Mm-hmm. And as it turns out, they sourced one batch of their hard drives from a hard drive that just was not up to spec. It was not as fast as the other hard drives. I don't remember if it ran at a different spin rate or what the problem was, but these were known as the Thompson drives. And they were in especially the initial runs of the Xbox. However, at the same time, they also required on the Xbox that your load screens be no longer than something like 15 or 20 seconds. I don't recall. And the Xbox having a hard drive was a real distinguishing factor, because you could install data to the hard drive, but you still had to respect that 20-second limit. So in order for our levels generally to load fast enough, we needed them to be coming off the hard drive, because our levels were big enough at the time that all the assets needed to load in from a hard drive, from something faster than the optical media, the CD-ROM, DVD-ROM. So that kind of sets the stage for what ended up happening, which was we needed to install a whole bunch of data to the hard drive before you ever loaded a level. And to do that, we needed to determine on the slowest hard drive out there, how long would that take? And that is exactly how long the intro is. Because while that intro is streaming off of the DVD, or after that has loaded, while that whole thing plays, it is all loaded assets, is all an engine. But while that is playing and you are interacting with it, it is actually streaming everything else the game is going to need to the hard drive. And that's why that is not skippable.
So when you say intro, let's be specific. You're talking about the interactive, like
the interactive beginning of the game, where you're the baby, and then you're the kid, okay. And then you're
not
in the
training.
Like
the fading text on screen stuff. You're talking about the full intro.
No, I'm talking about the full intro.
Got it.
The whole
yeah,
setup.
I just had forgotten that.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a great example of so it's okay.
I remember because somebody came to me. I think it was probably Tim Ramsay, who was the graphics, I guess the graphics lead or whatever. Him and Scott Peters were like, okay, we have this problem. We can't load the game fast enough unless we're on the hard drive, but we can't get things onto the hard drive fast enough to start the game. And so I brought in those guys and Adam Piper and Jeremie Talbot, who were technical artists on the project, to figure out what we could do to speed up loading generally, but also what can we do? And I basically did a back of the envelope calculation of like, okay, well, how many megs are we going to put on the hard drive, et cetera, and divided, by the Thompson rate and said, okay, Adam, Jeremie, can you do an animation in Engine that is this long, but uses no more than this many assets? And they said, got it. And they went and did it. Oh, that's what kind of guys. So the two of them basically did all of that.
Yeah. No, thing. That was magic. As far as
that came in, that would have been September, October before we finished.
Yeah. How funny. It's funny because that's a great story because I had forgotten the specific details. I knew it wasn't like originally part of the plan, but I didn't remember why. And then, and Jeremie and Adam are just wizards. I mean, they were so critical to that project being a success on so many levels, down to even like our trailer, which we didn't play or watch I don't know if it's on the disc. I think it's somewhere on the disc. Our kind of like internal proof of concept trailer that we ended up releasing. That was like basically just Jeremie putting that all together. Yep. And the animators, Dave Bogan and folks. But anyway,
Jeremie went on to Pixar.
Yeah. He went to Tippett first, but he ended up at Pixar. Yeah,
ended up at Pixar, and so did Brett Schulz, who was also on the.
Yep. Still there. They're still making it happen. I think. How funny. Yeah. I mean, that's a great example for people on just when it comes to game development in general, like the motivations and genesis of certain things, they can come from all over. Players never know this, but that technical constraint ends up guiding, creative or what have you, is really interesting. Yeah. And the whole like,
and they went to town on it. I mean, it's like, it's funny because you're the baby for how long? Like 4 seconds or something like that. I mean, or whatever it is, 10 seconds. Yeah. While that, what are they called? Camoans?
Caminoans.
Caminoans.
The planet's Camino. Yeah.
Okay. While that alien talks to you, I remember Talbot goes and is like, look at this. And he uses the fire button and the hand swings in the fluid. And you're like, that is so unnecessary, and that's just the kind of guy that those guys are. Of just like, let's just, not only are we going to do this whole thing that we have no time for, but we're also going to add spit and polish to it. Yeah. We had a lot of people like that on that project who were just the extra mile people. Oh yeah. And their names will come out throughout. And there are very few I can think of on that project who were not those people. So.
It was a very, very good team, very unique team. Yeah. Under duress and weird situation, but It didn't seem to faze them, like people, obviously, definitely people worked too hard, but they seemed to enjoy it. So yeah, pretty wacky. But the funny thing about that intro, especially the reason that it's there and the sort of cobbled together nature of it, when I have people ask me about the game, like often it comes up as something, that people mention because because, like Half-Life or what have you, there's those moments where it's just such a simple concept that the team ran away with, and but it does a pretty good job at putting you in the mood for what you're doing, and it shows a weird perspective on these clones, right? That are already kind of a forced kind of weird concept, in Star Wars. And I enjoy it every time, not because I worked on it, but just as a player, I enjoy it. I like that kind of stuff. So I think they did a great job with it. So, and it's not something that I still don't think it equates to something you're going to see very often in a Star Wars game. It's so, and I think it probably goes without saying.
Well, yeah, I mean that's partly because so often the Star Wars games are about the sort of chosen ones, right? And you don't have to set up who they are because everybody knows who they are, right? I mean, you're not playing a Star Wars game and need to have set up for you that these are the Jedi. Like you don't need that. Right. So you don't need any kind of establishing thing. Like, to a certain degree, we needed something like this. Even though it came from a technical constraint, the game is much better for it, because I can't imagine just sort of jumping into, okay, we're going to Geonosis. Like, who am I? What? Why is, and there's a lot of voice lines in there that support who you are and things like that. But, and I think importantly, that tutorial level comes in production. It's the last level we built. And that's important because it can bring in a lot of information at that point that maybe you didn't think to put in before then. There's a point at which somebody says something like, "Commandos, from what I hear, they can win the war themselves," or something like that. Just to like introduce how distinct you are. But that whole cutscene also, I think, just does really set up. And it's mostly just doing it through voice narration besides voiceover of this Kaminoan of saying, you're special, you're a commando, right? And just like going on and on about you and your brothers and etc. And it sets up the tone of the thing pretty well.
Unfortunately, I don't remember if it was Ryan Kaufman or
Mike Stemmle
that wrote. I think Ryan wrote that intro. I'm pretty sure
I think Ryan wrote the intro. Yes. Yeah. I think Mike did a ton of the incidental dialogue between the squad mates.
Yeah. And I think I ended up having to do some too, but it was they were definitely the writers on it. But and they did a great job, and they were coming in from other projects, and this wasn't even their main project. And Mike, both of them went on to Telltale and for many years. So, and Ryan was there from the beginning, I think, almost at Telltale. But and it probably goes without saying, but another pillar that we'll probably come back to from time to time that I definitely pushed on the team was we were going to be first person only always. With no traditional cutscenes. So there's some minimal amount of interactivity with the camera and the whole game. We're not one shot like God of War or something, but we're embracing it the way Half-Life embraced it. So that was another influence there.
No, I mean, but you are always embodying your character. So even if you have control over the camera, you are always basically controlling the head, right? You're turning the head around. Right. So you always are, even if you're not quite always in the helmet, because you're a baby first. You are almost always in the helmet. We actually made that into a thing. And the helmet, of course, partly came from the helmet in
Metroid Prime.
In Metroid Prime, I wanted to mention because I had recently played that on the stream.
Yep, I forgot to write that down as another influence. Yeah, we just steal from the best. Really, that's our MO.
And there was one more, Full Spectrum Warrior.
Full Spectrum Warrior we definitely looked at that one. And that
because it was another Xbox sort of squad based control, and SWAT 4 was another one I could think of from. That was pretty late, and those were both relatively late in development, I think. But they were things we looked at. Yep.
Yeah, good squad games. Yeah, Full Spectrum Warrior was Ooh, I'm blanking on that one, but that was a little more on the tactical side. You had actually full-size squads rather than fire teams, and a lot more military, a little more semi. But they were starting.
That was Laura Lynn Williams, I think, was the lead designer. Mick Williams.
Okay,
and that was also Pandemic.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, that was a different because they had multiple teams, and then obviously Mercenaries as well. So,
right.
Pandemic's very busy at that time. Eventually, getting purchased, of course.
Purchased and merged.
Yep. But then, what was the other one you mentioned? Oh, and then SWAT 4 was Ken
Irrational. Ken Levine. Yeah, we talked about it when we had him on.
Yeah, right.
I don't know if we talked about it on air or if that was off air. I think it briefly came up actually on the episode in our very first interview.
Yeah.
About that kind of taking the squads about as far as you could at the time, between his game and ours. So.
Right. Yep. So that kind of brings us through. I mean, the other thing to mention, kind of just an intro sequence, is we, I think we're the first. I don't know if we're the only, but we might be the only to not have a traditional Star Wars text crawl. For one, which we talked about probably with Day of the Tentacle, there's sort of tradition for every LucasArts game to have its own sort of animated LucasArts logo intro. And so as you can see, which I think we're all very proud of for this game, our LucasArts animation or LucasArts animated intro or logo intro animation was the movie was very specific to the game, right? It's very militaristic. It's very classic Star Wars feeling, and it's kind of like retro feel. With the audio is great in that thing. It's fritzy, kind of like low res monitor looking thing. And then
it's sort of like a TV version of like what the holograms are like in the Star Wars universe.
Hologram focus. So but then we didn't really have the traditional text crawls. We had these title plates that would sort of fade and give you some information like a text crawl does, but it wasn't presented in that. And I think the reason that I recall that we didn't want to do it that way is because it just, the text crawls, to what Brett was saying earlier, were very much about the melodrama, right? With the music, the swelling music, and it had the same goal of quickly getting you up to date on what you should care about in very few words. But it's, the text crawl is already that very 50s kind of feel that George wanted. And that's why they work for the rest of the Star Wars, content, and very melodramatic, but that wasn't the goal. We were trying to do not any of that stuff.
Yeah. They also really don't work if you're going to be first person, because they almost always then involve a shot panning down across something enormous, right? In space, right? So there's also just sort of, there's just ways that it doesn't work really well with some of the other goals of the project,
right?
Whereas the text intros, while they do sort of break that rule, maybe, I don't know, you can maybe imagine it's being projected inside.
I don't think the break is as far though, right?
Yeah, it's certainly not as far. And with the text crawl, you do have that expectation that the next thing you're going to see is a Star Destroyer passing above the frame or something.
Yeah, right.
And
I forgot too that the way those end with the sort of like day, location, battle kind of like moniker there, where it says, it said day 0 or 0 day or whatever, battle Geonosis, whatever. I forget if it says time of day or something, but I think I remember that, because I just love that kind of stuff in military movies, where it just has like the little typed out text at the bottom of the screen that gives you the location and the time and the battle or whatever. And so I forgot that we did that because it actually comes into play because we time jump between sections. So you see what day, and we were really embracing that, the beginning of the clones, the first battle for them, and then, going from there. So now an hour in, we're finally to the first level.
All right. So we'll talk to you next week. No.
We can, we can hit some stuff. I don't know how long.
Yeah, maybe we'll just talk about. I think the most important thing to talk about. I mean, I already mentioned that the tutorial was the last thing that we built, and we used it. One of the problems that we had, I think, and we ended up, I think, having to retrofit it into the next couple of levels, or maybe we would always plan those first 2 or 3 levels to be this way. But splitting up the characters like that doesn't make any military sense. And then we have you join up with them one at a time. So that was a thing that we did on the basis of we need to distinguish these characters more, because one of the things we haven't talked about, well, you talked about as part of the high concept, was they were all clones, but they originally all had voice sound-alikes. They weren't all voiced by Tamura Morrison, but I think we had found some people to do sound-alike impressions of him. And they were all wearing just the white suit. The white clone trooper suit, although it had been modified for the stylistic choices.
Yeah, Greg designed it. It's a commando specific suit,
right? But they didn't have the paint jobs in particular, I guess.
No, in fact, our trailer didn't have. Which I think is on the disc. Yeah, they're all white.
Yep, they're all white, and they were, I think, all white even at E3 that year when we had that demo.
Oh, good point. Yeah, you might be right. Yeah, and in fact,
part of that is this section. That's why it kind of comes to mind
because of the
in the section we played.
Right, because of the timing of this from a real world perspective, and let's see, there was some. I forget the exact timing, but I don't think we knew at the time that potentially that clones were going to have paint on them in the films. So I don't think we knew that it was even an option. Do you know what I mean?
Because often, and that's,
we don't
that's
get all the
thing we should probably talk about with this Star Wars stuff, is that working with the prequels was under a lot of secrecy, more so with the first one than 2 or 3, but the first one especially. There were some real restrictions on being able to see any of those materials. But then we would see things. I can remember seeing, the only part I have seen of episode 2 is the the arena at the end where Obi-Wan is hanging from some big stone thing to get a sense of Geonosis. But yeah, I mean, we were seeing stuff that wasn't finished. So I'm not at all surprised that there might be details about characters that were filled in later, possibly for similar reasons. Like nobody can tell these apart. It's hard to, center yourself in the frame, or when the camera cuts, we don't know who's who anymore or whatever. For us, it was more establishing personality. Again, I think that was Piper and Talbot who had done the paint jobs. It might've been Piper only. I don't remember,
well, Greg painted them, but yeah, I mean,
Greg painted them, and those guys had to do something else. They have slightly different gear, I think, on their backs or something like that as well. So they had to be re-rigged, and there's just lots of work. Maybe Piper modeled.
We had to get creative on how to differentiate them, and voice was a big version of that too, and even just tonal writing, which I don't know if you remember that, but
right,
the whole humor thing, which we can talk about later, maybe.
Well, I'll probably talk about later. But yeah, it definitely, there was this sense that we wanted to give each of these characters a chance to shine as we introduced them, so that we established who they were and what kind of things they were into, partly to reinforce things that gamers took away from it.
That's funny.
What's that?
What kind of things they were into? That's a funny way to put it. But,
I mean, Scorch, man, he loves blowing stuff up, and Sev, he's the sadist. That they were, and Fixer's just a brown noser, that guy. But they, to set up some characteristics about the characters that I think set an expectation for players that they each had abilities of their own that were different. In fact, they are not. This is not news to people who've.
But we should
heard me talk about it before or something like that. But there's a big smoke and mirrors going on through these first 3 levels of just, here are these characters. This one's good at bombs. This one's good at sniping. I guess Sev was Sev the sniper in that final assassination. They each have their thing that they're good at. Because we're going to have you deploying them to do things, but they're all actually exactly the same as far as that goes.
Yeah. Well, and there was even, I don't know if you remember this, but that, there were parts of the design in the early days where there was more unique control over who was doing what, right? And I think we even had tried it that way and realized that, it was just too limiting. And we actually, to achieve our goals of having a kind of a more mass market squad game that felt more fluid and more fast action, we couldn't limit only Sev being the only one who can use sniper points, right? We need the flexibility because you might want two snipers, or you might, in a way it basically limits level designers. So, and encounter designers, which in those days I think were one and the same, but, so everyone got to do everything, but I wanted to ask you this because I made a note of it playing, for this, episode. Is there a preference if nobody is on a maneuver or marker? We call them markers internally. If no one is on one and you press and you press on a sniper point, then Sev will be the first one to go, I think. Like
that is not true.
That is not true.
It's whoever's closest.
That's so funny. I thought for sure that when I was like, oh yeah,
nope.
When I do a hack,
it's purely whoever's closest.
Okay, well, good. There you go. Behind the scenes, smoke and mirrors, folks. But
we even fooled you.
But and I probably knew that at some point. But
you probably knew that. Yeah.
In fact, you probably forced me to make that decision at some point. Or you just made it for me.
No, I'm sure I just was like, no, ignore him.
But the interesting thing about that, especially with your answer, is to the point of characterization that Brett was just talking about. What things like that ended up doing is adding in unexpected opportunities, which we talk about on the podcast all the time, right? Of unexpected opportunistic design, where I had a good example happen to me in the last level where, let's see, Scorch was off maybe planning a bomb or something, and I needed somebody to get onto an anti-armor point. And so I obviously clicked on it, and Sev went over to go use the anti-armor, and the voice line that played, which I'm amazed that we thought about this, but I probably proved it or even wrote it or something at some point. It was, Ryan and Mike thinking this through really deeply. Sev comments on the fact that he's having to go over to do an anti-armor, which he doesn't want to do, and thinks it's beneath him because it's an inelegant way to fight. It's like,
right.
And so you have an opportunity where, yes, the system doesn't, force one type of character to be on only one type of maneuver. It actually adds to their character because they can comment on it. And I think that was not planned. That was not part of the original design to do that. And
it was not. And I will say, and this is the first time we brought him up, but John Hancock also had and John Hancock was the senior AI programmer and was responsible for the commandos themselves, with another programmer, Nathan Martz, helping with all the enemy AI, basically. John did a really, really good job of writing a system to support both progressing or moving through a huge list of dialogue that Mike and Ryan had provided, but also providing context-sensitive cues for when it would make sense to say certain lines, which was a whole big thing.
Yeah. And I think I think Halo was another influence for us on that too, because Halo's I don't know if you remember that. I don't remember if they had eventually come out with a white paper on that or something, but they ended up trailblazing, I think, a lot of that sort of chatter.
I played it in co-op, so almost none of the voice of that game would have come through to me. Like I literally don't remember it. I played it all through with Ramsay.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, the way that the Marines and stuff would talk was very dynamic and contextual to that stuff. So,
oh, okay. Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah. So
they don't. But anyway, get back to introduction. So you get this sense, and this actually is a time where we, I believe, did script that specific characters would do the things, right? So of course, Scorch is the only one around with the when you have to blow that obstruction. But then he's around and Fixer is around to hack into the whatever it is that you need to slice through, pardon me, Star Wars hacking nerds. And then Sev is his introduction is both that he takes down an enemy as you're watching, like, and he shows up. You can almost see, like, in a later game, like a freeze frame, cut out of just the character with some backdrop and his name, like Borderlands would do it this way.
Totally.
Like, because that's basically what that moment is doing. Like, this is this guy. This is what Fixer's like. This is what Scorch is like. You have those moments. And then of course him as the sniper at the very tail end of that little sequence when you're taking down Sun Fac. So really important stuff, and handled quite well. I have to say, we were pretty in command of the tools at that point, and had everything available to us. And doing the tutorial level first is always a mistake that people will make. You never want to do your first level first. It's the easiest level to make in that sense. Like, theoretically you don't have all the tools you're going to have later as a player, right? All the player tools you're going to give, they won't have all the weapons, whatever. But so it might make sense from a production standpoint, you think, but it actually ends up being a mistake, because doing it last means all the things you need to teach the player, or all the things that you want to call out to the player. That's really beneficial to be able to do that last.
It was beneficial too. And also, am I remembering right that we, like, I don't think we planned the tutorial well either. I think it was a bit of a scramble, if you will. I feel like, or maybe Troy Mashburn.
We gave it to the wolf.
We gave it to the wolf, and
he used to call me that, but I call him that.
I think it was one of those, not that it was not planned, but I think it was one of those things that we knew we did want to do last, because, as Brett said, we'd learned lessons, I think, in the past to do it that way. But also because everything else is coming in hot that you would train people to do, that means that at the end, you're really kind of scrambling on what the plan would be to do that. And then it was compounded by the fact that we needed and wanted to make the introductions of the characters even better. So it's sort of like that level ended up being very burdened by a lot of different things that are actually pretty complicated and hard to do. So, obviously ended up being very linear, very scripted to do all that stuff. So I think it's sort of from a gameplay perspective, one of the, obviously the simplest, sort of least lethal kind of game or level in the whole game, but that's by design. The only thing I wanted to mention, I think Troy and I both still have regrets on, is the heavy-handed nature to the tutorialization. It just doesn't hold up today. It's very, it breaks the pacing too much, and I think both of us even still today talk about ways that we could have done a better job with that stuff. But it was, it did its job. It just was very, very heavy handed. And there's more elegant ways to do it these days. So.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but I don't think it's, I do find it, a little much, a little heavy handed, but I don't, at the same time, I think there's so much you want to teach the player that you'd rather have it and not, again, keeping in mind, shooter game for a Star Wars audience that maybe you want.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for instance, though, like you don't need to stop the player you don't need to halt the player and have a dialogue box come up that they have to read about crouching. You just
true.
You just have, you just have text on screen and make them crouch, and they learn it after one time, so right. I think we both have evolved quite a bit in our design ethos over the years. And, and I can firmly say in those days for myself, not speaking for him, that for myself, I was still very much in that, no, designers are going to tell the player what to do and we're going to do it, and we're in control, and I've really tried to move away from that a lot more, where, it is really more of you want to look for elegant ways to trick them into learning things rather than force them. Right. They won't learn. No one reads that stuff, so they just get through it as quickly as they can.
Yeah.
What
they read is press A, continue.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't end up working anyway. So it's like, don't be so. Anyway, so that was just more of a personal soapbox I wanted to mention, because ironically, Troy and I talked about it probably not even that long ago. So, yeah. So I don't know, like maybe from a timing perspective, maybe we can start next episode. Like I think we should talk about a little bit more in depth about the Geonosis levels.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make a note to start with that next time and talk about the levels themselves, because there's actually a couple topics there for sure.
Yeah.
Especially my my ongoing battle with Troy about how difficult the third level is, or at least the beginning of the third level, I think it is. Maybe it's the fourth.
Which one's that?
The one where you have to blow up the bridge to have it fall, the stone bridge.
Mm-hmm.
But the very beginning of that section is very hard still, and it was impossible.
I think the game overall is too hard, and I think we all agreed on that after the fact, right?
After the fact.
Yeah, we didn't, which we can get into more, but I think we talk about a lot on the podcast of developers doing usability on their own games. It's not
very hard, yeah,
not easy. And
in fact, we have a question about that in the email. See that segue?
Nice.
We have that we'll get to.
So many topics that we didn't hit, and we'll keep at it. But I think we need to give these levels some space. So we can focus on levels next time and do this in the next section.
All right. Well, let's move on then to feedback. As we like to do here, we love to get reviews through the podcast app on Apple. And sometimes we get ones that are singing reviews.
You just got a somber kind of tone or something. I don't know what happened.
I did, because it's, this song is somewhat somber. You're probably not going to buy that. I'm trying to sell that, but I'm not sure I can.
No, I bought it. I couldn't wait.
You ready? Oh my God, it's like a dirge. Okay, the full lyrics did not appear on the podcast reviews. It was cut off. I think it was cut off either for length, or maybe because he used emoji. I'm not sure which. But I'm going to go ahead and try to do this as well as I can. Now, I won't be able to do all the sound effects that it really requires. Maybe I can do those in post. But I'm just going to go ahead and give my all. This is from Mike Baker. The subject, I had the actual name. The subject is Rock Me Brett. Okay. And it goes a little something like this. Rock me, Brett and Timmy, Brett and Timmy, Brett and Timmy, Brett and Timmy, Brett and Timmy. It's Dev Game Club. 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 Ooh, rock me, Brett and Timmy. Rock me, Brett and Timmy. Rock me, Brett and Timmy. Ooh. Pillars. 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 Veteran devs. I load into RAM. 1999, Brett and Tim began working together at LucasArts. February 25th, 2005, Star Wars Republic Commando is released. March 6th, 2016, after years in AAA game development, Brett and Tim create DGC. After 4 years of sharing their experiences and knowledge of games, DGC reaches over 200 episodes. 2020, American rock singer Brett Duvo records, Rock Me, Brett and Timmy, Brett and Timmy, Brett and Timmy, Brett and Timmy. There you have it.
Holy cow. Sound effects ready.
Oh, I was prepping that while I was waiting for you to show up earlier.
The only rock song that mentions RAM in it, I think.
Meaning random access memory, yes. I'm sure there's something about ramming somewhere in some rock song.
Sure. No, I mean, yes, random access memory for sure. Holy cow. Good one. Oh my goodness. That's a good choice of a song too. It works. It works for this purpose.
Oh, I know. I should try to put some backing tracks on that because it's a little. Anyway, thank you very much, Mike Baker. I appreciate it. Good work, sir.
Maybe we will have an album someday, or at least a playlist of just these that no one will want to listen to.
No, but we'll start it with yours.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah. Featuring Tim Longo and a few by Brett Duvall. Anyway, thank you, Mike. Let's move on to emails. I sent you one. Another one has actually come in while we've been recording. I'm going to try to skim that while you're reading to see if I can also read it on the cast. But go ahead with that first one.
Okay. I'm going to butcher his name again, but subject is great podcast, and now a question about difficulty in games from Kevin Gigier. It's a grab, not a goo. Okay. Hey, Brett and Tim. As an indie game developer, I've been really interested to hear your opinions on a variety of topics and games, especially considering that I tend to disagree with many of your stances. It's awesome. I love it. Keep them coming. Difficulty in games is probably the most obvious example, as I find reaction-driven retro games fairly easy. I completed Cuphead on my first playthrough in under 6 hours while streaming. What? Whereas I'd be useless in a Halo deathmatch. Oh, okay. Now it's getting interesting. I've been surprised to hear you blame some games for their unfair difficulty, such as the last Bowser fight in Super Mario 64, where I find it perfectly acceptable since you've already fought Bowser several times using the exact same mechanics. Says you, Kevin. So my question is, when is it okay to say that the game is the right difficulty and a struggling player is expected to acquire the skills to overcome a task? And as a side note, any tips on creating difficulty levels for puzzle games? Action games are easy. You can change the number of enemies or change various health or damage values, but puzzles tend to be a unified whole with a specific number of tools and an expected outcome. Adding just a single tool feels like it makes the entire challenge trivial. Despite the disagreements, I love the podcast and I'm looking forward to seeing what you play next. Take care, Kevin Giger. Yes, a couple questions in there, but
I can try the puzzle game thing. Because we were already, and this was the email to which I was referring as far as like how difficult the game is and things like that, and where you are as developers versus where your players will likely be. So we can kind of circle back around to that. For puzzle games, I think that the interesting design, sort of between puzzles or through a series of puzzles, is how you sort of lead a player down sort of a primrose path of this is the way to think about using this tool, and then you take a left turn for like, oh, but you didn't think you could do this with it, so that they have to look at the world through new eyes when they get to a puzzle where now this tool they've been using in one way turns out it also has some side effect or something, I don't know, that they need to think about it now in a different way. So that's one thing I think about. And the other is in how you combine them. Maybe you restrict what tools are available to a puzzle solver, so they can't use all the tools all the time. That's very typical in puzzle games as they sort of teach you the game, but it's also in itself a useful way of structuring puzzle progression, so that you sort of learn as you just sort of add things to the mix and add things that you can only get past by using the new tool, or then only these tools in combination, etc. So that's one thing I think of as far as that. I don't know about you. I don't know how many puzzle games you play, sir.
Well, I play games with puzzles for sure. Like I like the Sherlock Holmes games, and I'm playing I'm almost done with Call of Cthulhu right now, and there's some, it's puzzle. It's not Frogwares, but it's a similar kind of company kind of game. But yeah, I think it kind of depends on what kinds of puzzles he's asking about too, because I think maybe there's some slightly different answers based on the kind of.
I was thinking like abstract puzzle game.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, unfortunately I kind of naturally go to like adventure games and things, which have puzzles within a context of some kind, But I guess if I'll just throw, because I'm not a puzzle game designer, so I don't even think I'm equipped to totally answer this, but I'll throw out, their Tomb Raider obviously has puzzle-ish things, right? So the one thing that I'll throw out there that is a general thing that maybe works for multiple types of puzzle games is, I feel like, he jumped directly into the tools part of the question and how you kind of, and I think Brett's answer is good at just sort of how to leverage those and play them against the player, but also combine them in interesting ways. But I think messaging is actually something that I feel like is a dial that people probably, use to success and failure when it comes to presenting a puzzle. And again, I'm probably talking mainly about more of the puzzles in games than maybe what he's asking about with puzzle games that are just completely abstract. But I think, I don't know, maybe it applies a little bit to those too. But I think how you message both in macro messaging, which what I mean by that is which puzzles come in what order for the player and how you're training them on those tools over time, over 20, 50 levels. And then micro messaging being when you're in the puzzle, those are things that when, as you're designing them, I think you can control how you present those. So the puzzle doesn't necessarily need to fundamentally change over iteration, but your messaging and how you deliver the information that they need about the puzzle can change, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the other one,
I mean, that's a thing that they do in something like an Uncharted, where it'll be a while, you'll be fiddling with some puzzle that often this happens, and I'm often frustrated by it. But it's like, I actually know what I'm doing as far as the puzzle is going, but because it's Nathan Drake in this large room that I've got to go to multiple places, and if I make any mistake, it just slows it down. But he'll start hinting, like, oh, maybe I should look in my journal, and you'll be like, dude, I know how to solve the puzzle.
Right. Yeah.
It's just because this room's huge and I have to get over there to do the next step. And then you put some enemies in there. So I've been in this puzzle theoretically for 20 minutes, but not really.
Yeah.
I solved the puzzle in 15 seconds. I'm just making the puzzle happen. Right. Yeah, but I think he's more speaking to the more abstract.
Yeah, he's talking more to the abstract. Yeah. Yeah. And
I would pull apart existing really good ones too, that do things like that. I always fall back on Pitroids, because even though that came from Lucas Learning, it was one of the finest games that that building ever produced. I love that game. Great abstract puzzle game, but also Baba Is You is another thing that in the last couple of years has really pushed sort of abstract puzzling to different ways to break your brain. And it does this similar thing to what I describe, of like giving you more tools, verbs or whatever in that game, that mess with how you think about the world. So you'll come to rely on a tool, and then they'll take that tool away, for example.
Yeah, it's a good question. On the other one though, for the difficulty, when do you? I don't know if I have a great answer for that. I have always really respected Nintendo, as we've talked about on the podcast multiple times, I'm sure at this point, of that, Nintendo notoriously doesn't have difficulty levels, so that, they just ship one difficulty for every player. And I think as it's clear that Kevin is quite a good action player. And I don't consider myself one. And I think the Bowser fight is a really interesting example, because, I think just like Brett was saying with the Nathan Drake example, like in the Bowser fight, I knew what I needed to do, but from a coordination standpoint, I just couldn't consistently execute on it, and I think he has a fair point that, you know, there are times when you definitely are trying to ask the player to step up. And as the reason we talk about Dark Souls so much, I think as a sort of subgenre, is that the gratification you get from from vanquishing an enemy because it was so difficult will tend to be a bigger reaction for you. You know, you'll feel more gratification over that achievement because it was so difficult. But how you find that sweet spot, I don't know. I don't really have a good answer for the perfect way, because I guess the only answer I have that I would fall back on as a designer or even creative director is know what your goals are, what you're going for, and stick to them. And what I mean by that is, you know, in Mario's case, they know that they are an action game that is going to ask a certain amount of difficulty from the player, and don't back down from that. I think that's why I've always respected them from their difficulty, not having difficulty levels, is that they difficulty levels can often in the industry be seen as a band-aid for a problem of usability testing or play testing or iteration, not enough iteration. It's kind of a release valve, right? A pressure release valve. And, you know, and we know that they play test the heck out of their games. So they get a lot of that iteration time in there. So they're much more, but, you know, when it comes to solving that problem, when do you know it's enough? You know, come back to what you're trying to achieve. Stick to your guns on that goal. If you're making a highly accessible squad-based Star Wars shooter for a mass market audience, you might want to remember you're making. You might want to. No, I don't even blame. I mean, yeah, sure, we can talk about Troy specifically, but I think that ultimately falls on me as well, where it's like, you know, you have to remember who your audience is, who you're trying to go for, and what your goals are there, and stick to those. Because that will help guide you on when to stop making it too hard or too easy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I will say about this, the Mario thing. Yeah, I mean, I was also, for me, the difficulty of just doing the thing, not knowing how to do the thing. And that, you know, that might be just a skill platform. I am, you know, we're both getting older. We're maybe not able to pull that stuff off as well anymore. I also, you know, my platform playing, I mean, I love platformers, but it's not like I play them constantly. So I'm often taking long breaks, and then I'll pick one up and play it to death, and maybe play a couple in a row, and then not play one for another year or two. So there's that. And then with Nintendo specifically, Super Mario Odyssey has kind of gone in a different direction with this, although it's true to some degree of the earlier 3D Marios, at least, where they sort of have the mainline challenge paths. Like you kind of have to do these things to get through all the levels. And then they have sort of the optional stuff that you either have to find or discover, or is trickier to do, needs more of the move set, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I look at Super Mario Odyssey, and those levels are friggin' packed with extra collectibles, moons, all over the place. But to actually get past the level, you might only need 10, you know, or whatever the number is. So you don't have to go and get all the ones that are really, really hard to do. And as a beginning player, you probably won't. And if you're just a sort of novice, casual player, you may never get them. But they're there for the harder core players. Yeah, it entirely depends on who your market is. Nintendo's going for a pretty wide market generally. They've also had tiers of platformers. So they have their sort of entry-level platformers. There are middle-of-the-road platformers. That's Mario is basically there. And then there are even harder platformers. So they also do that specifically. And those games at the higher end of difficulty don't sell as well, typically, I don't think. I think that's like the Donkey Kong games.
Yeah, that's
and that's why they're not the Mario games, right?
Right. That's why I was going to add to my point too that you just hit, is just you have to be, if you do stick to your goals, and your goals are asking the player to really step up from a skill set perspective, you have to also be okay with leaving players behind. certain players behind, because it means you're going to inherently limit your. And I think though Cuphead did well, I know Cuphead did well. I think Cuphead is a good, interesting example. There's a lot of people who really like that game, and obviously aesthetically, it's an amazing game. But I know a lot of people who played 10% of it or 20% of it, and will never go back, even though they would say,
I know I won't start it because I know I just can't.
Yeah,
I can't play that.
Right. So they stuck to their guns. They hit the sweet spot of all of the kinds of people they knew they were going for. They just did such a good job that they got all of those people. But they probably, I'm sure if you talk to them, I don't have information on this, but I'm sure if you were to talk to them, they would probably say they know what their ceiling is. And they're probably never going to really go beyond that ceiling when it comes to a number of audience members that want that kind of thing. They did well because they got, and I would say Ori maybe is in a similar situation where they're the best of the best, so they're going to get all of those players, but they probably can't expand their audience too much beyond that. And you have to be okay with that. You have to scope your project accordingly to who you're going to go after. But don't compromise if that's the kind of thing that you want to do and make. I have a question for Kevin that he doesn't have to write back in about, but I would love to hear some of his thoughts on his comment about where he says he'd be useless in Halo Deathmatch. What he means by that and why he thinks that is. Because there is a difficulty question in multiplayer as well, speaking as somebody who worked on Halo Deathmatch games. And it's a different kind of conversation, but there still are similar questions that he's asking that apply to that situation too. So I'd be interested to know what he means by that and kind of what his thoughts are on that, because it's a cool kind of comparison to me, those two things, and that he sort of in his statement at least sort of is sort of pitting them as different things, and they are. I'm not saying they're not, but what his perspective on that is, it's very intriguing to me.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a 3D space thing or. Yeah,
that's what I mean. Like, is it that, or is it the skill of the other players? Yeah.
Good question. Okay, I thank you, Kevin, or I should say, merci. Anyway, we've got one here from Sebastian. It says, "Thank you for the inspiration." This may sound familiar to you as I describe it, Tim. So let me go ahead. Hey, Brett and Tim. About a year ago, after a colleague introduced me to your podcast, I was inspired by you to start my own small project. With a bunch of friends from the Masaryk University of Brno Games Studies Club, we started a series of meetings we call Game Degustation. Same as Dev Game Club, we let people know beforehand what game we're going to talk about, and at the actual event, we take turns playing the game projected onto a screen and talk about its design, usually in a pleasant bar or tea room environment. During our first year, we managed to have 9 in-person meetings and 9 online streams due to the pandemic. Our next stream will feature the well-known board game author Vlaada Chvátil playing his award-winning game Codenames. Thank you for the inspiration, guys, who make a great and interesting resource for all students of game design. Our events are in Czech only at the moment, but you can check it out at, and there's a Facebook link here I'll put in the show notes. Keep on rocking on. I rocked on quite a lot, Sebastian, this time.
Oh, yeah.
Sebastian from Brno, Czech Republic. First time we've heard from somebody in the Czech Republic, and I took this one despite the many things in here that would have made me laugh to listen to you attempt to pronounce them, including Vlaada Chvátil, the board game designer's name, because reading it, you're just like, how do I...
Could have been a good sabotage, though, yeah.
There's not enough vowels. They're not in the right places. Anyway. But yes.
That's awesome.
It made me think of the game theory group. The meetings we would have.
Right. Yep. Yeah, have we talked about it on the podcast? We must have.
I think it's come up sort of in passing from time to time.
Yeah.
But I don't think we ever talked about the format necessarily.
Yeah. We, ironically, I think, you and I and Andrew was another person I remember we talked. I think it was maybe 2000 or 2001, coming back from GDC, and I don't remember everyone involved, but I remember for myself, I just thought to myself, LucasArts has such a rich group of folks from a game development standpoint. I feel like we should be able to have GDC all the time, because there's so many things we can learn from each other internally. So we started a game theory group, and it was really just what he was doing too, and what we kind of do in the podcast, where I remember, I think you mentioned it when we played GTA 3, because that was one of the games we played for the game theory group, because it had just come out and it was obviously a big hubbub. And so we all sat down as a group in a room and played it and talked about, its implications and a lot of the theory stuff behind it. And we did that. We'd had roundtables. We did all sorts of stuff. And it was, I forgot about that. That was fun. That was really good. And I actually did a smaller version of that at Crystal when I went there, and, kind of lost steam after that because you just get too busy, but because it does take a lot of extra time. The other influence I want to reiterate, though, that I look for opportunities like this to mention is, Rebel FM was an inspiration for DGC as well, because they that's another podcast that I listen to, and they used to do game clubs for themselves, more modern games, and it wasn't sort of looking at influences and doing analysis. It was more of just a book club style, but that's where the original thought was coming from. So shout out to Rebel FM and those folks.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, thanks for writing in.
Awesome.
I will point
somebody from Czech. Yeah,
maybe 6 separate things in there that I thought, oh, Tim will never say that, be able to say that.
Thank you. I appreciate you looking out for me this once.
I also had one come in hot off the email. It's not presses. I don't know what it is. The ink's not even.
The servers.
I'm just going to go ahead and read this from Jesse. The subject is Animal Crossing. It's fun listening to reviews on some of the ways gameplay in Animal Crossing had evolved over time, because as a series regular, I have the tendency to overlook some of the more obtuse features since the experience has been so streamlined across entries. My girlfriend still complains about a lot of the tedious tasks. New Horizons was her first in the series. I really liked how New Horizons began small and personal. I thought it was an interesting design choice to work most of the basic resource collection into tasks that players already did in past games. Collect stone and iron by searching for your money rock. Collect sticks by looking for your furniture tree. It helped make collecting resources feel like a natural extension instead of something tacked on. For the same reason I dislike collecting wood, I never cut down trees, so it feels like something I have to go out of my way to do. As an avid Destiny player, I was excited for the daily Nook Miles, since they'd give me more reasons to play regularly. I was conscious of how Nook Miles could affect how I played and what goals I might make for myself, but I've found that I have enough that I just don't really need to think about them. I can play the game as I want to, and if I earn some of the daily miles, they're just a small reward for spending time in my town and doing the things I was already doing. Where in Destiny, they felt like a daily grind, in Animal Crossing, they feel to me like small regular bonuses. Looking forward to Republic Commando. One of my friends in college would badger me on an almost weekly basis to go play it because he enjoyed it so much. I guess I'll finally get around to it. P.S. And he sent us a fossil. So
nice.
He was who had sent that fossil.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I agree. So I'm continuing to play New Horizons and generally still loving it. Still have, our feelings are well documented in the last episode, but I am getting to the same place where he has gotten to, luckily, with Nook Miles, despite my criticisms of them existing. I'm finding myself sort of just naturally not caring about them as much because they're attached to everything you do. I just know they're just going to happen. You know what I mean? So I've started to not really let them change my behavior for just enjoying the game. I still am writing notes down when I play, even though we're not talking about the game anymore, because, man, there are a lot of little things they've done that impress me. It's a very polished, I'm not even gonna say game. I think it's a polished Animal Crossing game from an Animal Crossing fan, and I'm enjoying a lot of little things they're doing. So I think I'm trying to take a little bit more of the Brett attitude with it, and stop min-maxing as I usually do, and really, streamlining the experience and just kind of enjoying it. So that's helped me enjoy it more.
Yeah, so I'm still playing 2 Animal Crossings as well at the moment. I am still playing the one on the GameCube on a daily basis. I tend to spend more time in that one than I spend in the New Horizons, and it's partly because of the Nook Miles. I feel like that's the thing I have to do today. Although there's other things I also feel like I have to do every day, and that I haven't been able to break myself free of that yet with it. For the most part, I just kind of wander around and do the things I like to do, but I always look and see like what are the special things today and make sure I do them. And then I always go to the ATM thing, because if you go and interact with that, you get some Nook Miles. And what else do I always do? I always talk to all my villagers. I mean, it just, it's that stuff has continued for me, and it has, hasn't really let go.
Yeah. No,
I'm not. And I know that's partly me. I need to let go of doing those things, but it's still grabbing me to do it, and it definitely reinforces them. Like it pops up like the little ZL icon in the upper left, and all that stuff. So it wants to drag you to look at that every time you log in. Now there's a hot item at the store every day that like sells for twice as much. So I made 10 stone stools today so that I could sell them for double.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, it's all of that pressure.
So funny.
It's pushing me. And I think it's because I haven't been playing them along the way that I am responding to the,
gamification.
To the sugar, basically, right? I'm the endorphin rush of the thing went off, right? Is appealing to me in a way that I say appealing.
It's not.
It is motivating me in a way that it hasn't in the past, or it didn't in the original game. So
the grindification. So funny that he mentioned Destiny in the same breath. And I'm still playing WoW, so it's like I'm playing all this grindy stuff right now, and I'm playing Pocket Camp, right, which is the epitome of that. Yeah, I still just so confounding to me and weird that, I still believe Animal Crossing had an influence on mobile games, and now mobile games have this weird influence on it. It's this weird Ouroboros. Is that how you say that?
Yeah, Ouroboros.
Happening. So, but I think if it helps you, I don't know if it will, but I think maybe what I got to, because I've been playing a fair amount, is just the realization that Nook, like he said, Nook Miles are just, you're always going to have plenty. You don't need to seek them out at all. So like, especially those
I'm not spending them. I'm like,
but I mean, there's no need to like do go to get the daily bonus or whatever. Like there's just you'll get them just by playing, and it's a little unfortunate. I wonder if you can turn that notification off.
It's funny because I'm not generally like, I'm not motivated, as I've said many times, like I'm not motivated by the acquisition loops themselves, or like I don't have things that I want to do that are like pursue the sets or whatever, all that stuff. Like I know that in theory there's a point at which this game is sort of finished, in the sense that you've done some major, I imagine it's the like sort of linear progression of stuff, right? That my next thing is I'm supposed to build and furnish 3 houses. I don't know if that will ever happen, because the furnishing part of the game is kind of my least interesting. I'm least interested in that.
Oh, I love this one's good for that for me.
Yeah,
especially because you can make stuff.
So who knows? I mean, I don't know if I'll ever get there with that, but I think the thing with the Nook Miles that reinforced it to me was like, oh, that's how I expanded my pockets, and so now I'm looking forward to that. Like, so there's like this material benefit. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to keep doing those things so that when that comes along, when those things come along, I can buy them. Yeah. I haven't left the island again. I haven't gone to any of the local islands to rob them of their resources or anything like that, even though I know he can do that. I haven't been inclined. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much longer I'll continue with it, but I have continued. So,
well, it's good you're continuing with the original. That's cool. That's still has that core delight. So it's good to know, and I understand and I'm glad.
Well, all right. Well, that I think we have now cast a pod.
Yep, we went way over when we usually do, so you're welcome. I guess.
Continue to shelter in place and over-record our podcast. So here we are at the end of the podcast. Thanks for those emails to devgameclub@gmail.com. We love all the emails and reviews. We don't always read all of them on the show. Occasionally we get things, for example, directly about a thing like, hey, just wanted to say this, and we'll have a conversation by email. I do try to reply to everyone. And we occasionally get game recommendations to the email, as we did this week. But we don't usually read those on the air either, because we don't want it to be implicitly a promise that we'll get to it. But I do reply to them. So if you haven't heard from me, ping me again. Apologies. And of course, we love every review, singing, or whatever that was, or not, because that song is
performance art. That was that was what that was. Mixed media performance art.
That's right. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com, where we keep all the show notes, as well as all the episodes are there as well if you like to listen in the browser, and on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with JR at the end.
You can find me on twitch.tv/Brett Duville. I'm continuing to play Epic Mickey and Kirby's Epic Yarn. So talking about different platformers, there we are. I play those weeknights, and on the weekends I'll be playing more Republic Commando. Next week, in theory, we're going to play the second section on the Protector or something? Procrastinator?
Protector. It starts with a P. I think it's Protector.
Anyway, the ship. The ship section. And our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton and commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers. Thanks to both of them. Thanks so much for listening. Have fun killing bugs this week, and good night.
Good night.